So as a warning up front here, this will probably go on for quite a while. A lot of people have been asking me what are my thoughts, my opinions on Crusader Kings 3, and to be completely honest with you, I haven't really been following it. The only bits I've seen are the bits that they've put up on Twitter that I've basically just posted something sarcastic in response to. I have no experience with anything in CK3 thus far, besides, again, a couple of little bits and bobs that I picked up from mainly other people, to be honest with you. So I haven't received beta access, I haven't heard anything at all, no sort of press kits, anything. I'm not just saying that because I've signed an NDA either. I've heard literally nothing. So everything you're going to get in this video will be, I guess, genuine first reactions to all of this content that they have posted up on crusaderkings.com/news. I've loaded up all 36 dev diaries, and I'm just gonna sit here and go through them all, basically. Obviously, I'll read them first. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna subject you to watching me reading web pages. That'd be a bit strange. I'm gonna give my completely honest opinion here, both from the perspective of someone who has... Now, bear in mind, I only have 4,000 hours in Crusader Kings 2, so I'm only a beginner at best. From the perspective of someone who's both played the game and, of course, modded the game, I'll give you my perspective on both fronts there, and you know, hopefully give a bit of perspective on things. But people have been asking me for a long time, what do I think of this, what do I think of that? And I think I should probably answer them at long last, because my genuine answer right now is, I don't know. So we'll start right at the beginning with dynasties and houses. First dev diary goes into pretty massive detail about how dynasties are going to be handled from now on regarding cadet dynasties, the kind of head dynast, how would you say that? Dynast? Whatever. The leader of the collection of houses under one dynasty. So one thing they're actually implementing here is cadet houses, obviously first and foremost. Game of Thrones mod did a pretty good interpretation of a cadet dynasty system. You could kind of do it in the base game. I mean, they were more or less unrelated to you, you know, especially when they faded from kinsmen, and obviously if they married outside matrimony or whatever, you could essentially elevate a bastard to legitimize, and then they get their own house, but they were not intertwined at all. You had no power over that house, despite the fact they were a branch of yours, which of course have featured quite frequently in a lot of our series. One of the Game of Thrones series we did, for example, featured a cadet house of our house from another series going off and manifesting destiny, but there was no real way we could control them. And I like this for two reasons. Firstly, it obviously gives you that that extra level of control over situations like that, where there is a pretty prestigious branch house that, in the end, things might end up dwarfing your own dynasty. So they talk about how a dynast there, the house head, gains significant power and influence over the other cadet branches too, which I really like that from a gameplay perspective, because it gives you all sorts of crazy things, like potentially building an empire where vassals are only cadet houses. That gives a whole new level to map painting that wasn't really there before, but it still gives you that reason for control. Like beforehand, landing your own dynasty members was a little dangerous, because you ended up with a lot of succession questions and claims all over the place. But this way, it might be a safer way to do something very similar. So I like that as an idea, but what I actually really like is the idea of playing as somebody who is a cadet dynasty under a dynast, someone else that could potentially influence the series from that outside perspective. Is very, very cool from the content creation perspective, particularly if you've got those guys adding, I guess, a bit of extra difficulty in some ways, particularly if your goals don't line up with theirs, and it gives you a little bit more difficulty, and I guess a whole nother level of strategy if you're playing as something that's contrary to your primary dynasty. If you're playing as a heretic, for example, a separate culture, with all sorts of crazy goals, so you want to obviously supersede them and take control for yourself, there's a little extra difficulty in there, which I actually really like. I think that's a really good way of adding real difficulty and not artificial difficulty by, say, just giving the AI bonuses, which is basically how CK2 does it when you change the difficulty level on that one. The other thing I like as well is that dynasties have something independent here. So obviously when you die in CK2, you get kind of a score, which is basically a non-thing. Score is only really relevant if you finally finish a game, and you obviously get ranked on the tree alongside all the other dynasties, or the players, obviously, if you're in multiplayer. But it never really did anything. Now, this, it seems to have a similar system whereby it's actually usable in the form of renown, which I guess is essentially kind of prestige plus, if you want to look at it like that, which apparently give you various different things that you can spend it on. Now, I know a lot of people are probably already frothing at the mouths over this, because there was... I'm not going to say a controversy, because I think that's overblowing it. A lot of people were quite critical of Imperator Rome when it came out for having what people like to call mana systems, which are just mechanics. I don't really like the term mana system. They are just mechanics, and this has got something very similar, and I imagine a lot of people reading this might interpret it as perhaps another mana system. You've just got to look at it like Prestige. I mean, Prestige technically in CK2 is a mana system, right? But I don't think any of us really think of it like that, not in the same kind of black and white terms as you would as people did with Imperator. I mean, both Piety and Prestige, right? You spend Prestige to get claims, go to war. I mean, border disputes, a lot of the Jade Dragon casters but have really high Prestige costs. So this is obviously a very similar thing. And as it says there, encourages to mimic a playstyle that was common in reality, wasn't very practical in CK2. Spreading a dynasty far and wide. Exactly what I talked about with regards to claims and succession crisis and all that. I really, really like this. This sounds like it's going to add a lot of fun little side effects to a campaign. And again, especially for those of us who have played many, many, many hours of CK2, us beginners, a little bit of extra difficulty, which I really, really like. They also cover a feature that I actually really like as well, which is a bit of a sticking point for me with CK2. Say, for example, you're playing as the Holy Roman Empire, if you don't forge Bloodline, if you don't collect enough prestige, or kind of set yourselves up by just severe corruption, you know, granting yourself the Imperial Capital, granting you the Imperial Capital, whatever else. If you don't get elected and you just end up being the Count of absolutely nowhere in the center of Germany, then you kind of didn't really have an impact, you know? And all it really does is give you that incentive to make it primogeniture, otherwise you feel like you've lost an opportunity, or at least I do. This one talks about how they've got these kind of dynasty legacies, and they talk very briefly about this kind of legacy of blood. Looks as if it's going to be kind of a progressive thing. Kind of looks as if they've started unlocking warfare. You see that one? They sort of kind of started unlocking whatever that says. I genuinely can't read it. Excuse me, what does that say? Eru... Hang on. Ah, there it is. Erudition. There we are. So it looks as if you might be able to get kind of varying effects. You might not need to unlock the whole thing to get an entire bloodline. So it might be kind of a more flexible bloodline system if you want to look at it like that. I'm hoping they go into that more in one of the future diaries. Dev Diary 2, they talk about the actual map itself, arguably the most important part of any kind of grand strategy game. So this one is going to be purely opinion-based here. You're either going to like the map or you're not. And to be honest, I like it. But I didn't have a problem in the CK2 map. I thought for what it needed to do, the CK2 map is absolutely fine. Now, that comes with a caveat that I will only play the CK2 map with the border mods. Because the borders in base game CK2 are aggressive. Like, they are bold, so I guess you can't miss them. But with this regard, as you can kind of see, they've gone for the much more... Assuming, now I should also point this out, of course, a lot of the things we're going to see in this in these dev diaries are going to be beta previews. Should have already talked about this at the start of the video, shouldn't I? What a fool. They're going to be beta previews. Now, if you compare what CK2 looked like during the beta previews compared to what it looks like now, the game that we know as Crusader Kings 2 at that point looked closer to Crusader Kings 1.5 than it does to the current game. So just take that with a grain of salt, that this could look very, very different on final release, and of course that's why they put the under development here and all the screenshots. I, again, liked the CK2 map with a few caveats like the borders. I thought it was absolutely fine. I mean, graphically, it still holds up as far as I'm concerned. Looks as if they're going a bit more complicated this time around, so maybe selectable baronies themselves. Looks as if we've got some very specific border divisions, so you're going to be zooming real far compared to where you were zooming before. And it looks as if the map itself is obviously far more complex. You can see here, just around kind of the Irish coast alone, dozens more sea zones. Obviously not, there's only 6. But there's a lot more sea zones there around this kind of side, in towards the Irish Sea there. It looks far more impressive, and obviously there's going to be a lot more density. My only concern with that is those on lower-end PCs or perhaps big multiplayer games might suffer as a result of this. Obviously, I can't comment on performance. I've not really seen much of it. I've seen a very, very brief part of a Twitch stream, and obviously they're only playing single player in that. So that'll be something that we can only really discuss when the game comes out on release. It looks good, though. You know, it looks as if it's very, very highly detailed, like potentially having... I'll be honest, having an entire game in let's take the British Isles here, because they have it as the example. Playing an entire game in that ended up being fairly shallow, beyond a point. You know, you pick up a duchy, you pick up 2 duchies, you're basically unstoppable at that point, especially depending on the duchies as well. You get Wessex, you get Huisin, you're suddenly unstoppable. This one, though, it's obviously dense. Like, it is very, very dense by comparison here. This one obviously being the CK2, this one being CK3. Looks as if they've added a lot more divisions, too, so you could quite literally play an entire... And there's kind of a counterpoint to something I brought up earlier, but if you are zooming this far in, and if you are getting involved in a particular area of the world, it becomes a lot more feasible. Because if I played CK2 multiplayer games within the UK... It's very rare that 2 people would both pick, say someone pick Ireland, someone picking England, otherwise you're going to be fighting for territory pretty quickly. But that could be the entire point of a campaign in CK3 by the looks of it. Because there's a lot of territory here to grab, and I think that could be a very nice counter to what I was talking about before, where if you're too spread out, obviously it's going to be very laggy, but you'll be more focused in, because there's so much more to focus in on. So I think that's going to be I think that's going to be quite interesting. I like the idea of certain areas in the world that you probably wouldn't normally play in because they're a little bit shallow, just being denser by the medium of game mechanics, by having so much more to conquer, by having so much more to expand into. They kind of talk about things like impassable terrain here, which in base game CK2 is hideous to look at on the map, let's be honest. Again, that's why I use mods like Revolutionary Borders. Much more subtle here. As it says, they're using that to block up areas that they consider uninhabited enough to warrant it not being part of an existing county. I guess that would be something like, obviously, Siberia in CK2, the kind of Central Sahara regions, which obviously some mods do add. Kind of reminds me a little bit of, say, HIP, for example, which does add those states kind of throughout Central Sahara with routes between them. That sounds like they might be trying to emulate something very similar with that. It's weird that they kind of point out that this stuff is impossible there, but have city sprawl or population. I wonder if that's kind of plans for expansion in the future. Could be fairly interesting. Though Dev Diary 3 is a pretty dense one. This one is all about warfare and the various changes and simplifications. Not in a bad way. Let me just preface that the simplifying things, particularly when it came to war and in Crusader Kings, is not necessarily a bad thing at all. This is quite a dense one. So if it ends up that I am being the dense one, please bear in mind that I'm catching up on, what is that, like 9 months now of Dev Diaries over the course of one afternoon. And feel free to shout me and correct me in the comment section. I'll make sure those are pinned and hearted and whatever else you do in the YouTube comment section to make sure people can see that. So if I make a mistake, go check down there. I'm sure someone has pulled me up on it. So I'll try and draw some parallels between this and Crusader Kings 2, because of course all of us probably have, if you're watching this anyway, probably have experience with Crusader Kings 2. Seems like some of the systems are very similar. Like I said, some have been cut down, particularly the battles itself. We'll talk about more of that in a second. You have, essentially, levy, same as usual. So this guy, for example, has 6,800 and a single man. Then you have man-at-arms. Man-at-arms, as it says there, are the equivalent of retinues in CK2, and they go into a lot of detail about this, but it sounds like it is identical to retinues in CK2 with some caveats in that regard. There's also something new here called knights. Now, knights, from the sounds of it, I guess the best parallel to draw, but take this with a grain of salt, because it's not a very good parallel, might be your sub-commanders in armies in CK2. So obviously you have your 3 main commanders, one in your left flank, one in your right, one in your center. Then you can open up the army screen and obviously assign sub-commanders, which will give other kind of martial bonuses to the battle ahead. Knights are kind of a similar thing here. They describe them in this situation as being vassals that are particularly skilled at, there you are, vassals in courses round with high prowess, which is equivalent to combat rating in CK2. Something worth bearing in mind for future Dev Diaries, I guess. So that's how good a character is at fighting, I guess, rather more than martial, is how I'm going to interpret that. Rather than their kind of strategy and leading the armies, more so what they're like in the fray of things, which is good to know. Maybe more powerful, well-trained, because they are nobles, so they're going to have a lot more at their arsenal, whether that be armor or, you know, actual combat training. That sounds pretty good. I like that. And what I also like here is the potential war crimes, because there is a big force button, which implies to me that you could potentially say you've got a troublesome vassal kicking around in your realm, say a spy master who, unlike this guy, hates you. You could force him to be a knight in your army, and then you could go and fight perhaps a losing battle and watch him get slaughtered horribly. I like this. This is premium war crimes. So quickly dialing back to the kind of men-at-arms, they talk about how you can have different types, obviously available to you depending on the length of the game, so I assume you get more advanced things towards the later dates and more basic things towards the start gates, or perhaps pagans, for example, might have berserkers, might even have cultural retinues. They don't really talk about it too much here. But this is a lot more simplified. So in CK2, I actually just want to double check this so I wasn't wrong, but in CK2, you actually have quite a dense combat system going. So you have morale, you have maintenance. Morale is obviously how much morale an army has, that's fairly straightforward. You then have attack and defense stats for troop types, and all of that is then broken down into a subsection, which is skirmish, melee, and then pursue. What that means is obviously the 3 phases of combat. You start off in the skirmish. That's when your archers are going to get involved. Your light cavalry. Then during the melee, that's when your infantry are going to get involved. And then during pursuit, or if you lose, retreat, is how many troops are going to be lost on the retreat. So that's when light cavalry, again, come back in the clutch and kill all the troops that are trying to flee. In this, it seems a lot more simplified, which I'm glad, because so few people understand how the combat system works in CK2. I understand how it works. I just choose to ignore it, because to be frank, it is quite overcomplicated for what it needs to be. With 4,000 hours in CK2, and I frequently play on very hard. If it's a new mod, I'll drop it down to kind of normal, maybe hard, because very hard also has some fertility effects, which don't really, obviously, affect the difficulty more so than the inconvenience. The battles in CK2 very much are big number beats smaller number when you take into account things like river crossings, strait crossings, obviously the massive one, naval landings, troop type. That's really all you have to remember. I don't know anybody who personally goes off of attack and defense values, both in regards to skirmish values or... Let's be reasonable here. How many of us just say, when we're playing as Byzantine Empire, I want nothing but cataphracts right now? Or how many of us, when we play as Poland, go for just hussars? Definitely not doing that in my current series. So that is a very common strategy, and to be honest, it works. And even then, if you've got the best commander possible, like say you really dedicate a character's life, you get them genius, you get them strong, you chuck them in the combat societies early on, you get brilliant strategists as their education, then you really, really work it and get them up to 50 martial. Even a guy leading 3,000 light infantry versus 3,000 cavalry, for example, is still going to annihilate them because of his own martial prowess, which isn't very realistic. In this, it seems like they've adjusted that quite heavily, so that we've got damage, toughness, pursuit, and then screen. The opposite pursuit, screen allows you to protect fleeing soldiers from being killed. In that case, I guess that's kind of like your retreat. This is interesting because types are, again, simplified quite heavily. Now, like I said at the very start, simplified does not mean worse, and I fully agree in this situation that this is a far better system. Particularly, and I really, really like this, that you have a very simple tooltip here that describes what beats what. So in this case, you've got pikemen that counter light cavalry, heavy cavalry. You can see that they gain bonuses from terrain effects. Otherwise, you have to kind of memorize the terrain to some extent in CK2. You know, plains don't do anything. Mountains give a bonus to pikemen, etc., etc. Steppe give a bonus to horses. You know how it goes. In this, it's obviously got a very clear-cut way of you being able to see that, and I really, really like that, and it's got the reinforcement and maintenance too there, but this is going to be a much better system. Now, maybe it ends up being, when we do a deep dive into all the different files and whatnot, that there is actually an attack phase, a defense phase, whatever, or attack and defense values, I should say. In this, it seems like they've got that just as a permanent thing here, and maybe during all phases, it is the... if the same thing is perhaps applied, not entirely sure. I'm hoping they do a much deeper dive into this in future dev diaries, because this is kind of one big overview of war. So I won't speculate too much, because you never know, in 2 dev diaries I might be proven wrong here. Next up, they talk about siege weapons, which I really, really like as well, because you didn't really have siege weapons in CK2. You had the occasional martial event where you'd invent screaming arrows, or say a tank, or build a gun if you were part of the Hermetic Society. This time around, they actually go into a lot of detail about what you have access to. I don't know quite how deep this system is going to get, whether or not it'll just be a graphical change based on, say, something like your siege technology points. So, say, for example, level 1 siege tech gives you crappy little catapult, or level maximum siege gives you the mighty trebuchet. Don't know how the hell there's something beyond that. I assume they've just got it in the wrong order here. But it might just be graphical. However, the way they phrase it here, later on you'll unlock improved siege weapons such as trebuchets that are able to speed up sieges significantly. It could just be a modifier, or there might be an actual visual representation. Maybe it's something you need to attach to your armies. Again, I won't speculate too much because we've got 36 of these friggin' things, and there is probably going to be a lot more information going ahead. The other thing to mention as well, martial value, you can still lead troops, as it says there are plenty of different command traits available as well. I believe the one they use in this situation is Holy Warrior, Faith Hostility Advantage +10, so that means if you're launching a hostile Holy War like a Crusade, you get some bonuses in that regard. Again, these mean nothing to me. I don't think they'll mean much to any of us until we actually get into... until we actually get our hands on the game. Looks as if we've got, like, siege leaders there, defenders, coming straight from CK2. We've got... arsonists? I don't know. You know what Count Richard is like. Classic arsonist. The other thing they talk quite significantly about is this concept of advantage, and if I had to liken it to anything, it was the thing I talked about earlier where you have the 40 martial guy leading a troop and basically deciding battle single-handedly. Sounds as if it's something very similar. However, they make a point of saying that it averages out. They've also said here that advantage bonus of 30 during battle, which then translates to a rather significant damage boost. Again, we can't really be sure of what that exactly means until we get our hands on the game itself. But this sounds very similar to what your martial modifiers were to do. So your martial stat, though it does give some direct bonuses during battle, actually gave a percentage adjustment, I should say a multiplicative adjustment to percentages gained by traits. Say, for example, I'm going to pull numbers out of my arse here just to illustrate a point. If you had defender, let's say that gives 30% to your defense, a guy with high martial might times that by 2.5. And actually, the final result of that is obviously a lot larger as you have multiple traits. With a high martial, you're going to end up getting a pretty significant martial bonuses across the board there. Sounds very similar to what this is here. I do briefly talk about how commanders make a roll every few days in an attempt to increase an advantage or even it out. This sounds similar to the strategies used by commanders in CK2. So say, for example, you'll get legendary skirmish strategy when you enter a battle, and that is, again, purely random, as they say there, based on modifiers and traits. Same in CK2. It is purely random based on how lucky you get. Obviously, martial score plays into that as well, with negative commanders actually having, or commanders that are not good at martial, potentially having a negative detriment on your troops there. The rest of it actually sounds fairly similar to Crusader Kings 2. They talk a little bit about besieging, which is limited by fort level. We kind of know the drill on that one, and how obviously that will increase. They're required to get the Breach Walls event. That reminds me a bit more of EU4, or for those of you who have played it, Sengoku, which was kind of the predecessor game to Crusader Kings, whereby you have that kind of random chance to breach the walls, and then the siege can begin. You have to kind of starve them out first, things like that. Sounds like they might bring that system back, rather than perhaps just CK2, where you can rock up and just watch it drop down by 2.5%. There might be a more random element to that. I do personally prefer that a little bit more. Let's have the caveat that siege weapons are required to get the Breached Walls event. So the previous kind of strategy where you would take 10,000 berserkers, stick them on a boat, drop them in London, burn the whole thing down and carry off a load of gold might not work anymore. Seems to imply that obviously looting, I imagine, is going to be a completely different system, so it's probably not even worth mentioning. But it sounds as if that might not be so viable. Final closing words on this are regarding rivers. So now there are designated fording points rather than just being able to cross wherever. To be fair, certain mods took advantage of that anyway, where you were able to have kind of where they implemented straight crossings as a kind of strict river crossing point. Like that idea a little bit more. Felt a bit weird that you were able to, say, walk across the Nile but not sail a boat down it, which has been one of my big complaints with CK2 in a lot of series we've done. The other thing they quickly mentioned, that supply is no longer going to be so hardline. We've had it in CK2 where we've had armies of, say when we were fighting China as Rome. You send a troop of 50,000, they get routed into a different province because there's a massive Chinese army heading your way. Suddenly, in a single game tick, you lose 33,000 troops. In this, that doesn't happen. Apparently, armies carry a certain amount of supply with them, and then when you enter a province of higher supply than what you have, you kind of restock, essentially. Or at least that's how I'm interpreting this here. So it sounds as if these are, in my opinion, all great changes. I really can't complain at all with anything here. I think I like the sound of just about every single thing they've implemented there. Again, this is what I mean by simplification. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I like this. It sounds like something that's essential. There are a lot of people... I've tried explaining it to a lot of people over Discord that there are quite a lot of complicated mechanics, particularly for you modders out there. You'll know that making certain custom troop types and balancing it... Balancing is a pain in the ass. When it comes to custom troop types for CK2, you never quite know what effects you're going to end up having them or how potent they're really going to be, especially when it comes to spawning troops as well. So this is going to be a much more straightforward system, and I think I like that a lot more. Now people maybe won't scream at me so much when I, don't interpret the runes correctly when I'm moving my troops across provinces. Dev Diary 4, Development and Buildings, is... This is my Dev Diary. Everybody knows when I play base game CK2, I need a slew of building mods, because this is probably a bit weird, but I like either strategy games, so strict strategy games. I've got hundreds of hours across all the Age of Empires games, including Age of Empires 3, which that's a hill I will die on. That's a good game. 4X games, I'm also a massive fan of. Thousands of hours in Anno, Sins of a Solar Empire, really big fan of Sins. CK2, weirdly enough, is probably one of the only grand strategy games, which I'd argue is kind of the meat in the middle between those two genres, that I've really properly enjoyed. Sengoku as well. Never really got into EU4, never really got into Hearts of Iron. Stellaris I got into quite a lot. But those other two games not really. So this one is something I've been really, really interested in. Now, what we're going to do here, before I talk about that, is this is the first time I've seen a kind of CK2 county-level screen. So they talk about how baronies are an actual physical thing on the map. As they say, they're physically present on the map. Group baronies make up a greater unit called a county. So this is the first time I've actually seen this screen here. Now, I've read the diary at this point, and it seems like it's a much better system compared to how it used to be. I'm probably going to end up saying that a lot across a lot of these dev diaries, to be honest with you. So control, they use the allegory that it is basically similar or perhaps akin to your CK2 rebellion, maybe revolt risk, sort of combined with also when you take obviously control of a new province in CK2, you get the newly acquired holding modifier that makes it garbage for genuinely like a decade. This sounds like this is going to fluctuate a little bit more. Obviously, it gives you a lot more fine control because it's not simply a modifier reducing a county. It is now a whole number that you can influence, perhaps down to the single integer. So that sounds pretty good. It sounds a much better system, especially again for modding purposes. There, you're not relying on, again, that kind of artificial afterthought in terms of controlling provinces. I know Lux Invicta actually did a really good system with that, whereby buildings, and the other mod as well, Prince of Darkness did a really, really good system with kind of control in the way that buildings were used to represent your control over a duchy. But with mods like that, there's actually that number going for them now, which I think is going to actually provide them a massive foundation. You've got development level. As far as I can tell, development level is more or less just tech points, but kind of a county specific. Obviously, counties had a specific tech points level. When you click on any county in CK2, there's the economic tech points, the military tech points, the other one, which appears on every county. It seems like that's the same thing. Maybe it's an average score or something like that. Obviously, until I get into game and actually see that for myself, it's going to be a little different. You got your faith, your culture. Popular opinion, I'm actually kind of interested in as well, because the problem with CK2 is that your peasants were either content or they were rebelling. There was really no middle ground. And it was kind of a balancing act to crush rebellions when things got a little dangerous. So obviously it was a mean time to happen per year on how likely they are to rebel. So you will know that if you rebel, if you were playing Rome or some other giant monolith of an empire, you'd have rebellions all the time. And that puts me off of map painting in CK2 quite significantly, because you would just get, because of purely random chance, the larger your realm, the more rebellions you're going to have. You can't really grip it with an iron fist. I mean, that's obviously kind of a balancing thing to stop players blobbing so much. But it seems like this allows you, again, more fine control. You can do things that might endear you to the to the peasants and actually give yourself that safety net. Because in CK2, like I said, it's either nothing or a negative. This seems like there's the implication that you can actually impress the peasants and do nice things for the peasants outside of just having the trait just, for example. And you got kind of tax there. 0.44 loot, I assume, is independent, again, similar to your loot bar. 308 levies, 12,710 supply limit. I don't know if that specifically means you can have 12,710 men there. Perhaps armies, supply are now no longer so intrinsically tied to the troops, but perhaps the troop type, the commander, something like that. Something that I'm hoping they'll kind of expand on in future dev diaries. Castle holding. Now, is that where you can build buildings? Personally, hope there's no limit to castle buildings. Otherwise, that will make me cry very sad boy tears. The 4X player in me is pretty sad about that one. We'll see what they say. They do go into detail about how you can obviously build new holdings. City there is an exclamation mark, template is an exclamation mark. Maybe it's because you haven't built a castle yet. Maybe they're the same system as CK2. But as they talk about, they say that you can get a lot of cities for faster development. Was it called development? Yes, right. So faster development, you could have a lot of cities, whereas castles provide that. Curtain wall was the metaphor I was going to use there, but apparently quite literally in this case. Sounds like it'd be kind of fun. So if you were playing on kind of a small, isolated area, castles all around the edge, dense city center. I like that plan. And this is again, something that really appeals to me. That's why Floki's tech mod has always been in every single mod list we've ever played here. The buildings actually seem fairly straightforward as well. You've got your gold, your time, the actual outcome there, and then the holding effects too. So it seems very, very similar to CK2, just with a bit more flourish this time. Rather than it just being a simple bar with gold and then a bar that fills up obviously as it builds. So it's got a bit more details, and it seems like they've actually got quite literally a show details button there too, which I'm quite excited about. Now, on the subject of Floki's tech mod, they actually have these duchy buildings that they're calling them, which are unique buildings that you can only build in your capital duchy, which I think is fantastic. As you can see there, it gives, say, military schools, strategic marches. I guess this could be, in terms of base game CK2, this would be more akin to your wonders, or say the Byzantine Emperor. You've got Theodosian walls, etc. Obviously, with something like Floki's tech mod, you get the buildings in your capital that you have access to that can only be active in your capital, and if you happen to conquer someone else's capital, those buildings are deactivated if you already possess them, or obviously if they're outside your capital and obviously you possess them there. Perhaps a better analogy in that case would have been the palaces that republics have, which obviously have their unique buildings as well, which take place obviously in your capital. If you move your capital as a republic, your castle is uprooted and I assume carried on the back of 1,000 peasants. They do round it off by bringing that up too, that like CK2 where you have the Theodosian walls if you are the Byzantine Emperor, you also have the special buildings, pyramids, Colosseum, Offa's Dyke, my favorite of all of them. Some of these will be possible to construct during the course of the game, like the Tower of London. That's quite a nice little feature too. I can't think of any in base game CK2. You know, say like a wonder burns down, you can restore it. Luxor is obviously a great example of that. I can't think of any buildings that start off by default destroyed that you can rebuild. Like Hadrian's Wall? I really don't know. That's cool, though. I quite like that feature. It sounds as if it's not even something that's been destroyed that you're restoring. It sounds as if it's just going to be a fresh wonder of your own design, or in this case, a unique building. Maybe not quite that wonderful. Tower of London, really not up there with, like, again, the pyramids, the hanging gardens, really not quite comparable. Well, I'm going to be honest with you. I came into this video wanting to be critical of the game. I wanted to point out bits that I didn't like when I saw them. But I can't do that here again. Dev Diary 5 Schemes, Secrets, and Hooks, 26th of November last year. A little bit behind. This is all good. Like, genuinely, this is all good features. Damn it. I am... this guy, by the way, Petter, or Voff should write every single Dev Diary from now on, because he's actually genuinely funny with some of the stuff he writes down. So, the intrigue, which kind of has two different parts to it, they describe, well, three different parts to it, but the actual schemes themselves, which used to be your kind of plots or decisions, this is broken up into two parts now, where you have a kind of, I'm going to call it an offensive scheme, a hostile scheme is, I think, the actual terminology they work, and then a personal scheme, which is a bit more of a friendly scheme. I know that that's a bit of an oxymoron, but bear with me here. So with your hostile schemes, you've got things like murder, and I assume, say, blackmail, things like that. Your personal scheme, though, seems a bit more endearing, so more like swaying, which is exactly what they use as an allegory to what's happening in CK2. You've also got things like taking people on as a lover, which obviously replaces, to some extent, I would assume, the focus. So this sounds incredible. I actually really, really like this. Now, the system, they try and frame it as something somewhat unique. So there are two different mechanics to take part of this. It's their, basically, intrigue skill versus your intrigue skill with a combination of things like traits, spy master abilities, agents that you have involved, and agents are people that you can invite, or in this case, blackmail, maybe bribe as well, like you obviously can in CK2, into the plot. That will affect it. Now, this system is very, very cool. These dots basically symbolize how close it is to firing. Now, in CK2, you had a percentage chance. And obviously, 100% meant that it would basically have a chance of firing. It still had it was a confusing system, because a lot of people think that the plots can't fire unless they hit 100%. They can fire below 100%, it's just very unlikely to happen. So, with this one, your plots don't fire. At least this is how I'm interpreting it from what I've read here. It sounds like the plots don't fire, in fact, until they reach this 10th. Is that 10th or 12th? 10th. Until it reaches this 10th dot here, until that one turns green, then your plot has a chance to fire. But you can get things like setbacks too. Technically, mathematically, the system isn't really that different, because they say there's a chance each year, again, depending on the factors of it increasing closer to its chance of success. But really, in terms of CK2, if you have a plot going for long enough, it's technically true in that game as well, from a purely mathematical perspective. This one, however, has that visualization, which I really, really like, rather than just having... How many times have people complained about, you know, I've had this plot of 400% for 5 years, and it's still not fired? Well, this has got a bit more visualization in that regard, that you can quite clearly see mathematically what's going on behind the scenes, and I actually personally prefer that quite a lot. Hoping it's quite a flexible system too, because there seems like there's quite a lot of modability here. Need to get my hands on it before I can really commit to saying that, though. Then you've also got these secret schemes too, which I guess are plots you've uncovered, similar to CK2. Like I said, personal scheme is swaying or taking a lover. The other thing too is this hooks and secrets, which sounds pretty cool. Now, this is personally my favorite thing they've added here. Hooks and secrets are hooks you hold on people. So, I guess, what's the best way to describe that? People that you can manipulate is perhaps the right word for it. You have secrets as well. So, for example, this guy here has lain with men. So you could blackmail him for a hook and be able to manipulate him into, I assume, perhaps things like joining plots, perhaps agreeing with you with council requests to kind of relate it back to CK2 there as well. You got hooks on you. This is what I like. This is my favorite feature of all. Let me scroll down a little bit here. Is the secrets. Your secrets. People can find things out about you. So the spy on feature in CK2 kind of alluded to that, but it was a little bit lame, in that it would kind of randomly generate things, and if not, fuck it, why not just make it up? This guy's a devil, and then people will obviously stone him horribly. But in this, there's actual substance to it, and there's tracking to it too, which I really, really like, and I think that's a very cool feature, because it gives this whole level to intrigue. In CK2, I rarely play an intrigue character, because to be honest, it's a little limp, and you can kind of do it with I hope Paradox aren't mad at me for calling CK2 bad things. Look, I played it for 4,000 hours. I'm allowed. In CK2, it is a bit... It's kind of a bit crap because you can achieve much easier goals with intrigue with diplomacy or warfare or stewardship and by extent warfare, or diplomacy and by extent warfare as well by getting a load of allies. Warfare, basically. I'm saying you can basically just go to war with people and then who needs to plot against anybody, right? It is a little bit weak. This, though, seems infinitely better. And again, for a mod like Prince of Darkness, this seems perfect. This seems perfect to be able to blackmail people like that. And even something a bit more straightforward, like the Game of Thrones mod, which is an interpretation, I guess, of medieval times. That is, again, perfect for this, because you've actually got the spying and the intrigue outside of, or within your court that you wouldn't normally be able to do much with, besides just getting murdered, besides being on the receiving end of it. So I really, really like that. And then again, you see there you can bribe them, you can use a hook. I don't know if you can bribe them perhaps as openly as you can in CK2, where you just force money on them and they gain an opinion. You know, people in CK2 can't turn down money, which I always thought was a bit strange. It was kind of an implicit bribe that they had no choice with. It was just, obviously, of course, people in real life wouldn't let you, you can't just give a gift to a politician and have them do things, right? So in this case, it looks as if they might have a chance to decline it, especially given that user hook has a will accept, and then the bribe potentially could also have a decline. I like that idea. And I guess maybe if people decline your hook, you can out them for it, and obviously that comes with some side effects. Weak hooks are used up when expended. Strong hooks only get a cooldown ready to be used again later. The source of the hook determines its strength. The strongest hook comes from blackmailing someone over the most horrible secrets. Incredible. I like it. You can call King Eric an incestuous man, and that's got it's got a percentage chance. I actually overlooked that the first time I read through this. It's got a percentage chance to it. That's quite cool as well. So I wonder if their personality traits might affect, say, they're proud, paranoid. They might not be so reluctant to joining in your blackmail plot at that point if you found out they were a dirty sister toucher, or brother toucher, or touching whoever they... Look, I'm not going to judge him. I'm just going to blackmail him over it. I love this system. I mean, it's just infinitely better than the CK2, right? I never play an in-trade character in CK2 because it's just pretty shallow, and at the end of the day, can't really get you very far. Sure, you can plot your way to killing whoever you want, but if you don't have the manpower or the money or the diplomacy to back it up, you can't take it, and you certainly can't hold it. Whoa! Oh, okay. Sorry, I remembered something else I wanted to bring up, and then my screen bled on me. I wanted to, of course, mention that recently we've been, of course, playing CK2 with the Imbibe with Promises mod, which is a fantastic mod that essentially has a very similar aspect to that you can bribe someone to do something significant for you. In that situation, I'm mostly using it to bring people to court that normally you wouldn't be able to. Even if you do bribe them, even if you do force that gold upon them and gain the opinion, they might still say no. They might do it in exchange for a council position or whatever else you can use that mod for. So it seems as if, again, this is another... not necessarily popular mod, that's not one of the biggest mods, but it's a great mod. It's one of my favorite mods, and it seems as if it's another thing they are implementing into CK3. I think we're going to have to make this the last one, because I very much underestimated quite how much crap there would be to talk about. So maybe we'll just do one of these every few days or something like that until we're caught up with... I mean, it'll basically be time for the game to release one at that stage anyway. Maybe we'll do one a day until CK3 comes out. That might round us off quite nicely. Dev Diary 6, Council, Powerful Vassals, and Spouse Councillor. Hello, friends. Hello, my friend. I'm Wokegg. I'm so sorry. Hello. He's going to tell us about all of these council positions. So the interface is the first thing I kind of want to draw attention to because it looks different to CK2. So you really start breaking it down, and then it's basically the same. So you've got Chancellor there. I assume this button is a replace Chancellor button. Obviously, his diplomacy score, his particular duchy, and I assume he is a landed character on the fact that he, or maybe his dynasty flag or whatever, but I assume he's a landed character based on the fact that not only that, but he also has the, what appears to be the powerful vassal symbol from CK2, apparently also his opinion as well there, and a whip? And I'm not entirely sure why. Perhaps that's quite the literal political sense of a whip, whereby you can basically make sure he falls in line. Now we've got icons over at the side, which I assume are their jobs. So in this case, we've got collect taxes, oversee construction. I believe they said in a previous diary, your steward can also improve development. So that might be what that is. Then, of course, we've got maybe perhaps peace there, claim fabrication. We've got army, training, other things like that, and then you've got your spy master there. So I assume these buttons at the side quite simply represent the jobs that the councillors have access to, and then if they're highlighted, that's what they're doing right now. So this is actually very simple. It's again, very, very similar to... I'll be honest, it reminds me a lot more, and this is going to sound weird, of Crusader Kings 1, because Crusader Kings 1 had a very kind of ornate council system. CK2 was just menus after menus without much kind of, it sounds odd, kind of personality in it. You know, it didn't have these nice decorated backgrounds, or this man holding a scroll, or this man holding a bag of money, but CK1 actually did have this kind of crazy dense council screen, and it reminds me a little bit of that one. The only difference is that they kind of point out is that instead of state stewardship, whereby, and this is the only real issue I've got with everything, state stewardship is gone. Sorry, I should say all state stats are gone. They've done away with it, but instead, the efficacy of the Chancellor and their primary stat is going to be far more relevant. So they've written here, dramatically affect their efficacy in the time to set them. They've actually said, affect, it's the wrong effect, you want the one with the E. Because you affect the effect. Anyway, doesn't matter too much. They point out that basically a crap councillor will have not only a detrimental effect on the job you set them to, so not only will they be able to collect less taxes than a more skilled councillor, but they will have negative events also associated with it, which, to be fair, also happens in CK2. For example, when you try and proselytize a place, if you use a guy with low learning, they get trampled, or in my case, killed, all the goddamn time. Say, for example, you go to the Byzantine Empire to steal their secrets, then you end up getting your spy master castrated, which can be a political play, sure. But in this case, they make it sound like it's got a lot more effects to it. Now, it shows here possible side effects: efficient taxation, increased control, slow construction, loss of opinion, loss of control. Might be, again, down to traits as well as the primary stat. But we'll see how that goes. Side note, I actually kind of like this as well, where they say that the only time a job will ever pause is if you have a councillor not assigned. So say, for example, you have nobody acting as your steward. It's pretty frequent in CK2 that you will have a steward collecting taxes. He'll die, you'll get a new steward, and you'll immediately get him to collect taxes in exactly the same place. I quite like that, just from the perspective of someone who is horrendous at remembering what to do, particularly when I'm recording and I'm paying attention to 1,000 things at once. That stuff generally, you know, that stuff does kind of fall by the wayside. They talk about some of the more interesting jobs here as well. So you've got integrate title, speeds up the drift of a valid title into your RAM. The only way you can really control that in CK2 is, of course, with the rules before a game. You set to very short or very long, varying between, I believe, like 10 years or 200 years at the very other end, 25 years at the shortest end. Don't really remember. I rarely change it from default. Increased control, like they said, that's a way to avoid using those really horrible modifiers in CK2 where you get a new province and then you have to wait 10 years before it's any use whatsoever. So a lot of these jobs, I won't go through all of them obviously, but a lot of these jobs sound basically like things that are missing from CK2, and it really would not surprise me if some very talented modder goes away and adds them all to CK2. I can't do it. I'm too busy working on like 3 mods simultaneously right now, but I'm sure someone will do it at some stage. Then we've got, and this is the most interesting thing to me, you've essentially got 2 other positions to consider to some extent. So you've got your primary spouse. They specifically specify it's your primary spouse in this situation. Now, funnily enough, we've actually been playing with another mod by the same developer as the guy who made the Invite with Promises mod, which is not only skilled counselors, but also spouse empowerment mod, which allows your spouse to do exactly this. In hindsight, was he the guy I was just talking about when I said one mod would probably add all this stuff to the game? Because I'm saying this and I'm realizing, hang on, I think he might be reading these dev diaries and just adding it to CK2. I'll go and see when they were released. I actually might be right on that one. But she can basically assist with various things, or just it says that they default to the kind of assist ruler, unless they're landed, at which point they've got their own shit to worry about. However, this is kind of already a thing in CK2 as well, but it only really kind of rears its head if you and your spouse in CK2 have the same education, at which point, say, for example, you're a steward, your spouse would come over and say, you've messed up that F in trigonometry there, go home, and then I'll get shouted at again. But that's essentially the only time that really does rear up. Also gives you the kind of nice excuse. What's the effect? You like fall in love with your wife or something like that. She gains diligence. It's a pretty good event, but this is a lot more of a hardline system. This is actually a kind of legitimized and formalized variant of that. The other thing as well is the they specifically mention an archbishop here, but kind of the head religious figure in your realm is the one collecting the taxes from the other religious figures in your realm. So whereas before in CK2, if you're an emperor, any direct bishop under you, you have to impress. Otherwise, they'll send taxes to the Pope and not you, or more specifically, just won't send you taxes, right? So to avoid that, you end up sending them a bribe. That increases their opinion. They send you gold back. Not really what you spent, but hey. This has a bit more of a simplified method on that. So it seems as if the way they write it is, I don't know where exactly they've written it, don't worry about it too much, it's here somewhere. Basically the bishops report to the archbishop or the leader of the kind of clergy within your realm, and this bishop in particular has to be the one that you impress. So I quite like that mechanic. Very much means that there's less micro involved with making sure every bishop from the arse of nowhere, you don't have to bribe them. You can just bribe Big Bishop. Otherwise, obviously, it says there, since Aelgel's opinion of you is +1 or less, you gain no taxes, or what's interesting is no levies from church holdings. So that makes it a lot more relevant, because a lot of the time, especially if you are a large ruler, you just ignore the bishops. Who cares if they're giving money to the Pope or the religious head in that situation? Levies actually make it a lot more impactful. Talk a little bit more about the waifu here. And then they do talk about how, very briefly, don't go into it much in this one, they say they'll do it in a future dev diary, so we'll try and catch up with that in a second, but they do talk about how the bishop or the archbishop cannot just be fired so easily. There are legal methods of removing it, short of straight up murder, which I think is a lot better, personally. Because obviously with CK2, you have troublesome vassals, you sack them, you replace them with loyalists, you pass everything you want. They actually mention that in a second as well, that your powerful vassals basically have to sign off on a lot of the stuff you do. Now they make it, the direct example they use in this situation is that any vassal can veto succession changes, for example. So if you've got one vassal that doesn't like you, you can't change succession. That's how they imply it here. So here we are. CK2 requires to have all your vassals who both de jure and de facto belong to you in one of your titles approve of you before you change succession. In CK3, that veto belongs to your powerful vassals alone, and they very much know it. Whereas before, you were able to kind of have half the council on your side. That was enough to change it over. It seems to imply that this time your powerful vassal alone, if you have one dude, can mess everything up. So it seems like powerful vassals are a lot more relevant, and of course, council positions, as they mention, are a way to kind of supplicate to those guys. Overall, we'll leave it there for today, because there are, again, like 36 of these. So we're a sixth of the way there. There are a shitload of these to get through, and I'll try and kind of do one a day if I can. There's a lot to digest here already. I'll go and get read up on the next ones, and then I'll kind of refresh when we get to actually recording the next one. But again, feel free to shout at me and complain at me if I've messed anything up here. Interested what you guys think about these features as well, whether or not you agree with me with regards to some of the modding changes, especially with regards to the economy. Big fan of that. The control scheme, or the control, you have the prosperity as well. That sounds incredible, and I think my favorite feature out of all of it is definitely the plots. Of everything we've seen so far, actually, I don't know, that's quite difficult. Plots or the war screen. Be harder to pick my favorite feature out of those two. The simplified war is going to make it so much more approachable to just about everybody. But the plots and the intrigue make the game so much deeper. That's a hard choice. That's a very, very hard choice. And I think my most critical thing out of the whole thing is the map. I think that, overcomplicated is going to make it even less approachable. But they've solved a lot of the overcomplication issues by making the UI a lot more friendly. So, tit for tat, really. I'm impressed. I'm impressed so far. And more impressed than I thought I would be. So, fingers crossed, when we get through the other dev diaries, I'm still just as impressed. Because I just get the strange feeling people will probably want me to play CK3.